The ice was a living thing. It crept under the worn leather of her boots, a predator seeking the warmth of her bones. Alara's fingers were numb, stiff claws that could barely grip the splintered wood of the bucket handle. Each gust of wind that howled down from the frost-fang peaks was a physical blow, stealing what little heat her threadbare cloak provided. They called her the ghost of Greywood, an afterthought, a shadow clinging to the edges of her father's grand hall. She was less than the hounds that slept by the hearth, for at least they were fed with purpose. Her purpose was to be invisible, to scrub the floors until her knuckles bled, and to never, ever be a burden. Her father, Lord Valerius, had a gaze as cold as the winter outside. He had looked at her that morning, his lip curled in disgust. Lyra, her stepsister, stood beside him, draped in furs and smiling a small, cruel smile. The delegation from the south had been unimpressed with his offerings. His coffers were dwindling. He needed something to sweeten the deal. 3 horses, he had said, not to her but to the grim-faced man beside him. Sturdy mares, for the girl. Alara's breath had caught in her throat. A trade. Not a marriage pact, not an alliance. A sale. She was worth 3 horses. The thought was a block of ice in her stomach, colder than the wind. She was not a daughter. She was livestock. Now, hauling water from the half-frozen well at the edge of the estate, the words echoed in her head. 3 horses. Was that all she was? A flicker of defiance, hot and sharp, pierced the numb despair. It was a feeling she quickly smothered. Defiance earned lashes. It earned a locked door and a cold, empty belly. The bucket sloshed, icy water splashing over the rim and soaking the hem of her dress. It would freeze solid in minutes. The pain would be immense. She barely registered it. Pain was a constant companion, a dull hum beneath the surface of her skin. It was the silence that was truly terrifying. Lyra appeared at the kitchen door, framed by the warm, inviting light from within. The scent of roasting meat and mulled wine drifted out, a paradise Alara was forever barred from. "Faster, you useless thing!" Lyra snapped, her voice sharp as broken glass. "Father's guests are thirsty, and you're dawdling. Do you want me to tell him you're being lazy?" Alara bowed her head, the movement stiff and painful. "No, Lyra, I'm coming." "Look at you," Lyra sneered, stepping out onto the stone path. Her fine boots were clean, her cloak a rich, deep crimson. She was everything Alara was not. Beautiful, cherished, seen. "Filthy, pathetic. I can't imagine what those southern traders want with you. Perhaps they need a new scarecrow for their fields." Alara's jaw tightened. She said nothing, focusing on the treacherous path back to the keep. Each step was a careful negotiation with the slick, uneven stones. To fall would be to earn a beating for the wasted water. Lyra was not finished. She stepped in front of Alara, blocking her path. "Do you know what they say about the Shadowlands? They say the men there are more beast than human, that they flay their enemies and feast on their hearts." Her eyes glittered with malicious glee. "I hope they find you tasty." Without warning, Lyra's hand shot out and shoved the bucket. Hard. Ice-cold water cascaded down Alara's front, a shocking, brutal deluge. The empty bucket clattered to the ground. Alara gasped, the cold so intense it felt like 1,000 burning needles stabbing into her skin. It stole her breath, paralyzed her lungs. "Oops," Lyra said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "So clumsy." She turned and glided back into the warmth of the keep, leaving Alara shivering violently in the courtyard. The cold was absolute. It sank its teeth into her, deep and unforgiving. Her dress was already stiffening, turning to a cage of ice around her legs. She knew, with a chilling certainty, that as she stayed out here, she would die. But going back inside meant facing her father. Wasted water. A broken bucket, perhaps. An interruption for his important guests. Which was worse? A quick death in the snow, or a slow one by his hand? Something inside her snapped. The tiny spark of defiance she had been tamping down for years erupted into a flame. Not here. She would not die here, a frozen statue in the courtyard of a man who thought she was worth less than his animals. Her mind, numb with cold, worked with a strange, desperate clarity. They were trading her. The deal was done. The Southern men, emissaries of the Shadow King Malachor, would take her in the morning. But she would not be here in the morning. She turned her back on the keep, on the only home she had ever known. It was not a home. It was a prison. She stumbled away from the light, her frozen dress cracking with every step. She ran. She did not know where she was going. She only knew she was running away. The forest loomed ahead, a wall of black trunks and snow-laden branches. The wind sliced like claws, but she pushed through it, fueled by a terror that was finally greater than her fear of her father. She scrambled over a low stone wall that marked the edge of the estate and plunged into the trees. Darkness swallowed her whole. The pain in her hands and feet was a distant roaring. Her body was a machine, clumsy and failing, but still moving. Branches whipped at her face, leaving stinging cuts on her already frozen skin. The snow was deeper here, sucking at her legs, trying to drag her down and hold her until the cold could finish its work. She fell. Her knees hit the frozen ground with a sickening crunch. The impact sent a jolt of agony up her legs. She tried to push herself up, but her arms were useless, her fingers frozen into unfeeling clubs. She lay there, face down in the snow, the scent of pine and impending frost filling her senses. This is it, she thought, a strange calm settling over her. This is where it ends. Not in a warm bed, not even in a cold cell, but here, alone, in the heart of the winter wood. It was almost peaceful. The roaring in her ears faded. The pain began to recede into a dull, heavy numbness. Paragraph. Her consciousness was a flickering candle flame about to be extinguished. She was so tired, so very tired. She let her eyes drift shut. The image of 3 horses, strong and healthy, flashed behind her eyelids. A bitter, final thought. At least they would be warm in their new stables. A sound broke through the encroaching silence. A low growl. It was deep, rumbling, and close. Too close. Her eyes snapped open. Adrenaline, cold and sharp, flooded her veins, a last desperate defense against the encroaching void. She tried to lift her head, but her muscles refused to obey. She could only shift her gaze, her cheek pressed into the biting snow. 2 points of light glowed in the oppressive darkness. They were the color of molten gold, lambent and intelligent. They were not the eyes of a common wolf or a bear. They held a terrifying, ancient wisdom. The growl rumbled again, vibrating through the ground, through her very bones. A shape detached itself from the shadows. It was a wolf, but a wolf of impossible size. Its shoulders were as high as her own waist, its fur the color of midnight dusted with silver frost. It moved with a liquid grace that defied its massive frame, its paws making no sound on the snow. Fear, primal and absolute, seized her. This was it. The beast Lyra had spoken of. It had come for her. She was going to be torn apart. She closed her eyes again, bracing for the tearing of claws, the crushing of jaws. But the attack never came. Instead, She felt a strange warmth spreading near her. The scent of pine and winter storm was suddenly joined by something else. Something primal and masculine and inexplicably safe. A soft puff of warm air ghosted across her frozen cheek. She dared to open her eyes again. The great wolf was standing over her, its golden eyes fixed on her face. It was not snarling. Its expression was one of curiosity. It lowered its massive head, its nose just inches from her own. She could feel the heat radiating from its body, a stark contrast to the deathly chill that had claimed her. Her shivering, which had almost stopped, began again, racking her body with violent spasms. The wolf let out a soft whine, a sound completely at odds with its fearsome appearance. It nudged her shoulder gently with its snout. The touch was surprisingly soft. Then, the world seemed to warp. The air shimmered around the beast. The clear outline of the wolf blurred, its form expanding, rising, changing. The sound of cracking bones and shifting muscle filled the air. Alara could only stare, her fear momentarily replaced by sheer, uncomprehending awe. Where the wolf had stood, a man now knelt. He was impossibly large, broader and taller than any man she had ever seen. He was naked to the waist, his skin pale in the moonlight, corded with muscle and covered in a tapestry of old, faded scars. His hair was long, black as a raven's wing, and fell in a wild tangle around his shoulders. But it was his face that held her captive. It was a harsh, beautiful face, all sharp angles and predatory grace, and his eyes. They were the same eyes, molten gold, glowing with an inner light, and they were fixed on her with an intensity that burned. He reached for her, his hand large enough to encircle her entire head. She flinched, a pathetic, helpless movement. He paused, his fingers hovering just above her cheek. "You are freezing," he said. His voice was a low rumble, deep as thunder, yet impossibly soft. It resonated not in her ears, but in her soul. He moved with a sudden, fluid speed. Before she could process what was happening, he had scooped her up from the snow. Her frozen limbs screamed in protest. He cradled her against his chest as if she weighed nothing. The heat from his body was a shock. It was like being plunged into a forge, a living, breathing furnace of warmth that chased the deadly cold from her skin. The contrast was so extreme it was painful. 1,000 stinging shocks all at once. She gasped, burying her face against the hard plane of his chest, driven by a primal instinct to seek that life-giving heat. He wrapped his own massive cloak around her, a thick, heavy fur that smelled of the forest and of him. He held her tight, his arms a cage of solid muscle. But it did not feel like a prison. For the first time in her life, she felt protected. "Hold on," he murmured, his voice a vibration against her ear. And then he was moving, striding through the forest with a long, sure-footed gait, as if the darkness and the deep snow were no obstacle at all. The world was a blur of black and white. The only reality was the solid, rhythmic beat of his heart against her cheek, and the impossible, wonderful heat that was slowly, painfully bringing her back to life. Who was he? What was he? Her mind, still sluggish and clouded, could not form the questions properly. All she knew was that she had been running from a cold death, and she had run straight into the arms of a burning fire. She did not know which was more dangerous. Right now, she did not care. She was warm. He carried her to a cave hidden behind a curtain of frozen waterfalls. Inside, it was surprisingly dry. A fire was already burning in a shallow pit, its light dancing off the rock walls. He had been here before. This was his place. He laid her down gently on a bed of thick furs near the flames. The sudden loss of his body heat was a physical blow, and she let out a small, involuntary whimper. The cold, ever present, began to seep back in immediately. "Shh," he soothed, his golden eyes soft with a concern she had never seen directed at herself. "I have you. You are safe." He knelt beside her and began, with surprising gentleness, to work at the frozen laces of her boots. His fingers were long and calloused, but his touch was deft. Alara watched him, her mind still struggling to catch up. He was a monster. He had to be. Men did not turn into wolves. But his eyes held no malice, only a fierce, unwavering focus on her. He peeled the frozen leather from her feet. Her skin was a mottled, waxy white, completely devoid of feeling. She knew, distantly, that it was bad. He cursed under his breath, a low, guttural sound. He took her frozen foot in his large hands. His skin was so hot it was almost scalding. A sharp, agonizing pain shot up her leg, so intense it made her cry out, arching her back. It felt as if her bones were on fire. "I know," he said, his voice tight. "I am sorry. This will hurt." He did not let go. He held her foot firmly, his thumbs pressing into her soul, forcing the warmth, the life, back into the frozen tissues. Tears streamed down her face, freezing on her temples. The pain was excruciating, a cleansing fire that burned away the numbness. She writhed on the furs, but he held her steady, his golden gaze never leaving her face. He was an anchor in a storm of agony. He did the same for her other foot, and then for her hands, his touch firm and unwavering despite her whimpers of pain. He was forcing the life back into her, and it was the most painful thing she had ever experienced. But through the haze of agony, she knew he was saving her. When he was done, her limbs were throbbing with a dull, aching pulse. Feeling was returning. She could wiggle her toes, curl her fingers. They were red and swollen, but they were hers again. She lay back, exhausted, her body trembling with the aftershocks of pain and cold. He moved away from the fire and returned with a water skin. He lifted her head gently, holding it to her lips. The water was cool and clean. She drank greedily, her throat raw. He set the water skin aside and just knelt there, watching her. The silence stretched, broken only by the crackle of the fire. The intensity of his gaze was unnerving. It felt as if he could see right through her skin, into the bruised and battered corners of her soul. "Who are you?" she finally whispered, her voice a hoarse rasp. His expression did not change. "My name is Kaylin." The name meant nothing to her, but there was a weight to it, a power that seemed to hum in the air. "Why did you help me?" she asked, her voice barely audible. He shifted, moving closer. He reached out, his hand hovering near her face again. She watched it, mesmerized. She was no longer afraid, just overwhelmed. He gently brushed a stray, damp strand of hair from her forehead. His fingers brushed her skin. It was like being struck by lightning. A blinding white light exploded behind her eyes. A searing heat, far more intense than the fire, shot through her veins. It was not a burn, but a torrent of pure energy. It originated from the point of his touch and raced through every part of her, a wildfire of sensation. She cried out, her body arching off the furs, every nerve ending screaming. On the skin of her throat, just below her ear, a pain erupted, sharp and precise, as if she were being branded with a hot iron. The scent of ozone and something floral, like night-blooming jasmine, filled the cave. Kalen snatched his hand back as if he had been burned, his eyes wide. He stared at her, at the place on her neck where the pain was most intense. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound of pure, possessive shock. "It is not possible," he breathed, his voice raw with disbelief. Alara's own hand flew to her throat. Her fingers trembled as they traced the source of the lingering, burning sensation. The skin was raised, tender. What was happening to her? What had he done? Kalen's golden eyes met hers. The curiosity was gone, replaced by a blazing, undeniable certainty. It was a look of recognition, of discovery, of something found after a long, lonely search. "Mine," he whispered. The word was not a question. It was a statement, a fact, a declaration that shook the very foundations of her world. He reached for her again, slowly this time, as if giving her a chance to flee. But she was paralyzed, caught in the gravity of his gaze. His fingers gently tilted her chin up, exposing her neck to the firelight. He stared at the spot his touch had burned. "You're her," he said, his voice thick with an emotion she could not name. It was awe. It was reverence. It was a hunger that had waited for centuries. "After all this time, you are here." Her mind reeled. Her? Her who? She was Alara. She was the ghost of Greywood. She was worth 3 horses. She was no one. I don't understand," she stammered, her heart hammering against her ribs. Her body was thrumming with a strange energy, the echo of that lightning strike. And beneath the fear and confusion, a deeper, more instinctual part of her felt settled, as if a piece of her that had always been missing had just clicked into place. It was terrifying. "The bond," he said, his thumb stroking the sensitive skin of her jaw. The simple touch sent another jolt, softer this time, through her. "It has marked you, claimed you." She pulled away, scrambling back on the furs until her back hit the cold rock of the cave wall. "Claimed me? What are you talking about? You can't just claim me." His expression softened, but the possessive fire in his eyes did not dim. "I did not choose it, and neither did you. It is a law older than the mountains. When a true alpha finds his mate, the bond chooses. It has been dormant in my bloodline for 1,000 years. I thought it was just a legend. Alpha, mate, bond." The words were from old stories, whispered by nannies to frighten children into behaving. Stories of the shifters, the wolf kings who ruled the vast, wild territories to the north, beyond the Frostfang peaks. Her father had always spoken of them with a mixture of fear and contempt. Savages, he called them. Kalen was the Alpha King, the supreme leader of all the northern packs, a being of myth and nightmare. And he was looking at her as if she was the most precious thing in the entire world. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. It was too much. Her world had tilted on its axis and spun out of control. "No, you're mistaken. I'm nobody. My father just sold me for 3 horses." The humiliating words tumbled out before she could stop them. Kalen's face hardened instantly. The softness vanished, replaced by a chilling, predatory stillness. The temperature in the cave seemed to drop. "He did what?" The question was spoken in a low, deadly calm that was more frightening than any shout. He made a trade," she faltered, intimidated by the sudden shift in his demeanor. "With men from the Shadowlands, emissaries of Malachor." At the name Malachor, a vicious snarl tore from Kalen's throat. His lips pulled back from his teeth, and for a second, the civilized man was gone, replaced by the apex predator. His golden eyes blazed with pure, murderous fury. "That filth-peddling usurper," he growled. "He dares to send his minions into my territory? To bargain for what is mine?" He surged to his feet, pacing the confines of the small cave like a caged lion. His power rolled off him in palpable waves, a pressure that made the air thick and heavy. Alara shrank back against the wall, her fear returning with a vengeance. This was the king of savages her father had described, a being of untamed, terrifying power. He stopped his pacing and looked at her, his rage still simmering. "No one is taking you anywhere. You belong here, with me." His certainty was absolute. It left no room for argument. But her entire life had been an argument against her own worth. How could she be this mythical, fated mate? How could she belong to a king when she had never even belonged in her own home? "You don't know me," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm weak. I'm nothing." He crossed the space between them in 2 long strides and knelt before her again. He took her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his gaze. "You are not weak," he said, his voice fierce. "You survived a father who would sell you. You survived a blizzard that should have killed you. You survived the awakening of a bond that would have shattered a lesser soul. You are the strongest person I have ever met." His words struck her with the force of a physical blow. No one had ever called her strong. No one had ever seen the resilience behind her quiet obedience. He saw it. He saw her. A single tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. He caught it with his thumb, his expression softening once more. "You are exhausted, and you are in shock. Sleep," he commanded gently. "I will watch over you. Nothing will harm you here." She wanted to argue, to deny the impossible truth he was presenting. But the fight had gone out of her. The warmth of the fire, the harrowing return of feeling to her limbs, the emotional and physical shock of the bond, it had all taken its toll. Her eyelids were impossibly heavy. She looked at him, at this impossible man-wolf king, and for the first time in her life, she believed someone when they said she would be safe. She let her eyes drift shut, succumbing to the bone-deep exhaustion. Her last conscious thought was of the strange, burning mark on her neck, a brand that tied her to this terrifying, beautiful stranger, a brand that declared her his. Alara awoke slowly, adrift in a sea of warmth and unfamiliar comfort. For a moment, she forgot where she was. She was not on her lumpy straw mattress in the cold attic room. She was cocooned in thick, soft furs that smelled of smoke, pine, and him. The fire was still crackling merrily, and the cave was filled with a soft golden light. She sat up, her body aching but functional. The throbbing in her hands and feet had subsided to a dull soreness. She touched her neck. The skin was still tender, but the burning sensation was gone. It felt like a small, intricate scar. Her brand. Kaylin was not in the cave. A knot of panic tightened in her chest. Had it all been a dream? A hallucination brought on by the cold? She scrambled out of the fur bedding, her bare feet sinking into another thick pelt on the cave floor. The rough-spun, half-frozen dress she had been wearing was gone. In its place, laid neatly on a rock, was a tunic of soft, dark wool and leggings of supple leather. They looked impossibly large. His clothes. She quickly dressed, the clothes hanging loosely on her small frame. The wool was warm against her skin. She rolled up the sleeves in the leggings, feeling slightly less vulnerable. She looked toward the cave entrance, a shimmering curtain of ice. He had said he would watch over her. Where had he gone? As if summoned by her thoughts, his scent filled the air just before his shadow fell across the entrance. He pushed aside the frozen waterfall as if it were a simple bead curtain and stepped inside. He was carrying a skinned rabbit in one hand and a bundle of herbs in the other. He had pulled on leather breeches, but his chest was still bare, his powerful physique breathtaking in the firelight. He stopped when he saw her standing there, dressed in his clothes. His golden eyes swept over her, a slow, appreciative inspection that made her skin tingle. A slow, possessive smile touched his lips. "It suits you." Alara flushed, pulling the oversized tunic tighter around herself. "Where did you go?" "Hunting," he said, setting the rabbit down. "And gathering. Your feet will need a poultice." He gestured with the herbs. "The frostbite was severe. This will help with the swelling and pain." He moved with an economy of motion, preparing the herbs with the same deftness he had shown tending to her feet. He crushed them on a flat stone, his focus absolute. She watched him, still struggling to reconcile the gentle healer with the terrifying predator. "We need to talk," she said, her voice stronger than it had been the night before. He looked up, his gaze steady. "Yes, we do." He finished with the herbs and set them aside. "Sit down." It was a command, but his tone was not harsh. It was simply absolute. She sat on the furs by the fire, tucking her legs beneath her. He sat opposite her, the firelight playing over the hard planes of his face. He was devastatingly handsome, in a way that was wild and untamed. "This bond," she began, stumbling over the word. "The mark. What does it mean?" "It means you are my mate," he said simply. "The other half of my soul. It means my life is now tied to yours. My strength is yours to call upon, and your pain is my pain. It means you are Luna of the Northern Pax. You are my queen." Queen. The word was so absurd, so far removed from her reality that she almost laughed. "I can't be a queen. I don't know how. I'm a servant." "You were a servant," he corrected, his voice firm. "That life is over. Your new life begins now." Desperate hope, fragile and terrifying, fluttered in her chest. A new life? A life where she was not invisible, not worthless? A life where she was cherished? It was a fairy tale, and she had learned long ago that fairy tales were lies. "My father," she whispered. "He won't just let me go. He made a deal." "Your father has no more claim on you," Kalen stated, his voice dropping into that dangerously soft tone again. "He forfeited any right when he tried to sell you. He is lucky I do not go to his keep and burn it to the ground for the insult." "You don't understand," she insisted, leaning forward. "He's a lord. He has guards, and he's allied himself with Malachor. They will come looking for me." "Let them come," Kalen said, his eyes glowing like embers. "Let the Shadow King send his entire army. They will find only death at my border." His confidence was staggering. It was the absolute certainty of a creature who knew, without a doubt, that he was the apex predator. But she was not. She was the rabbit he had brought for their meal. Before she could voice her fears, a sharp sound from outside the cave made them both freeze. It was the crack of a branch, too loud to be an animal. It was followed by a man's voice, muffled by the ice. "She has to be around here somewhere. The tracks lead this way." Alara's blood ran cold. She knew that voice. It was her father's captain of the guard. Kalen was on his feet in an instant, a low growl starting in his chest. He moved to the entrance, silent as a wraith. He peered through a crack in the ice, his body tense. "Who is it?" Alara whispered, her heart pounding. "Your father," Kalen said, his voice laced with contempt. "And your sister?" Lyra, of course. She had probably delighted in leading the hunt. Alara's brief, fragile hope shattered. They had found her. Her prison had come to reclaim her. "He brought a dozen armed men," Kalen observed calmly. "And someone else. Cloaked. He smells of shadow and rot." One of Malakor's men. Her father had brought his new business partner to collect his property. "What do we do?" she asked, panic rising like bile in her throat. Kalen turned from the entrance, and the look on his face was one of cold, calculated fury. "They have made a grave mistake." He looked at her, and his expression softened fractionally. "I must leave for a short time. I need to lead them away from this place, and I need to see the full extent of this new alliance." "Leave?" she cried, scrambling to her feet. "Don't leave me! They'll find me!" He crossed to her in a single stride, his hands landing on her shoulders. His grip was firm, grounding. "They will not find you. I will draw them east into the deep woods, but you cannot stay here. It is the first place they will look once they lose my trail. You must go north. Follow the river until you reach the stone claws. My patrol will find you there. Show them your mark. They will know who you are." He was giving her instructions, a plan of escape, but all she could hear was that he was leaving. The thought of being alone again in this vast, dangerous wilderness was terrifying. "I can't," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "I don't know the way. I'll get lost." "You will not," he said with unshakable confidence. He took her hand and pressed it against his bare chest over his heart. "Feel that? That is the bond. It is a compass. As long as I live, you will always know where to find me. Close your eyes and focus. You will feel the direction. North." She closed her eyes, trembling. She tried to block out the sounds of the men outside, the fear, the confusion. She focused on the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm, the warmth of his skin. And then she felt it. A faint, subtle pull, a tug in her soul pointing north. It was real. She opened her eyes, staring at him in wonder. "I will deal with them," he said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "And then I will come for you. I promise." He leaned down and pressed his lips to her forehead. It was not a kiss of passion, but a seal, a promise. A brand of ownership that was somehow also a vow of protection. "Now go," he commanded, his voice urgent. "There is another exit at the back of the cave, behind the firs. It is small, but you will fit. Run, and do not stop." He released her and turned back to the main entrance, his shoulders squared. The predator was ready to hunt. Alara hesitated for only a second. Then she did as he commanded. She ran. She found the small fissure in the rock, barely wide enough for her to squeeze through. As she slipped into the narrow passage, she heard a terrifying roar from the main cave, not a man's shout, but the full-throated howl of a great wolf. It was a challenge, a declaration of war. She emerged on a ledge high above the river, the wind tearing at her. She didn't look back. Clutching the feeling of the bond, that strange compass in her soul, she turned north and ran along the treacherous cliffside, her oversized clothes flapping around her. She was no longer running away from something. She was running toward him. The hours that followed were a blur of terror and exhaustion. Alara scrambled over rocks, pushed through dense thickets of pine, and waded through snowdrifts that came up to her waist. The compass in her soul, that steady pull towards the north, was her only guide. It was a faint but constant reassurance in the terrifying wilderness. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of the wind sent a fresh jolt of fear through her. Were they following her? Had her father's men seen her? Or worse, had something happened to Kaylin? The bond felt steady, a continuous low hum of energy. If he were hurt, surely she would feel it. The thought was a cold knot of dread in her stomach. She finally stumbled upon the landmark he had described, the stone claws. Two massive, jagged peaks of granite that rose from the forest floor like the talons of some great, buried beast. Relief, so potent it made her weak, washed over her. She had made it. She huddled at the base of the rocks, trying to shelter from the relentless wind. Now, all she could do was wait. Wait and hope his patrol found her before her father did. The sun was beginning to set, painting the snow in shades of orange and purple. The cold was deepening. Suddenly, she heard voices, male voices, speaking in a language that was guttural and strange, yet somehow familiar. She pressed herself back against the rock, her heart hammering. Were they Kaylin's men? Or had Malicor's forces cut her off? 3 figures emerged from the trees. They were large men, broader and more rugged than her father's guards, dressed in thick furs and leather. They carried axes at their belts and moved with the quiet confidence of hunters. Their eyes, sharp and intelligent, scanned the woods. One of them spotted her. He stopped and raised a hand, halting the others. He said something in that strange tongue. They all turned to look at her, their expressions unreadable. Fear warred with Kaylin's instructions in her mind. Show them the mark. Taking a shaky breath, Alara pushed herself away from the rock and stood, her small frame trembling. She pulled down the collar of the oversized tunic, exposing her neck. "Kaylin sent me," she said, her voice small but clear. The men exchanged glances. The leader, a powerfully built man with a thick graying beard, took a cautious step forward. His eyes narrowed, focusing on her throat. As he saw the mark, the intricate swirling pattern that was now a pale silver scar on her skin, his eyes widened in shock. He dropped to one knee in the snow, bowing his head. The other 2 men immediately followed suit. "Luna," the leader said, his voice thick with reverence. The word was spoken in her own language, though with a heavy accent. It was the same word Kaylin had used, queen. Alara stared at the 3 huge, dangerous men kneeling before her in the snow. It was surreal. An hour ago, she had been fleeing for her life. Now, she was being worshipped. "Please, get up," she said, uncomfortable with the display. The leader rose, his gaze now filled with a fierce, protective loyalty. "Forgive us, Luna. We did not expect. The Alpha King did not tell us he had found you." "He was busy," Alara said, the understatement of a lifetime. "My father's men were here." The man's face darkened. "The Southern Lords trespass far from their lands. The Alpha King will teach them their place." He gestured for her to follow. "Come, we will take you to the rendezvous point. You are not safe in the open." They led her to a hidden camp, well fortified and guarded. The moment she entered, a ripple of whispers and stunned looks followed her. Warriors, both men and women, stopped what they were doing to stare. They all saw the mark, and one by one, they bowed their heads in respect. It was overwhelming. These were the savages she had been taught to fear, but there was no savagery in their eyes. There was awe, there was reverence, there was acceptance. For the first time, she felt like she was not an intrusion, not a burden. She felt welcomed. The bearded warrior, whose name was Gunnar, led her to a large, warm tent. Rest, Luna. We will stand guard. The Alpha King will be with us by morning. But Kaelin did not arrive in the morning, nor did he arrive the next day. Panic began to claw at Alara. The bond, her internal compass, was still there, a steady thrum, but it felt distant, strained, as if he were very, very far away. Had he been captured? Wounded? Was he even still alive? The uncertainty was a slow poison. Gunnar and the other warriors tried to reassure her. The Alpha King is the strongest of us all. He cannot be beaten. But she could see the worry in their eyes, too. An Alpha King had not been challenged on his own territory in centuries. On the third night, as she lay sleepless in the tent, a wave of agony crashed through her. It was not her own pain. It was his. It tore through the bond, a searing, white-hot agony that made her scream. She clutched her chest, gasping for breath, feeling a phantom pain as if a blade coated in silver and shadow had been thrust into her own side. He was hurt. Badly. And then came the despair. It flooded her, a cold, black tide of hopelessness that was not hers. It was his rage, his frustration, and a deep, soul-crushing anguish at their separation. He was trapped. He was being held. The pain subsided, leaving her trembling and weeping in the dark. The bond was still there, but it was frayed, weakened, tainted by a dark, cold magic. Silver. They were using silver on him, the shifter's bane. And through that weakened connection, a whisper reached her mind. Not a word, but a feeling. A desperate, urgent plea. Hold on. And then, a single, clear image flashed in her mind's eye. A dark fortress of black stone, perched on a desolate mountain peak, surrounded by a swirling vortex of shadowy energy. Malakor's stronghold. That was where they had taken him. She sat up, her tears drying, her fear solidifying into a cold, hard resolve. They had her king. They had her mate. The girl who had been worth 3 horses was gone. The girl who had shivered in fear was gone. In her place was a woman who had been touched by destiny, a woman who had been claimed by an Alpha King, a queen. She stormed out of the tent, her eyes blazing with a light that was not entirely her own. Gunnar and the other guards, startled by her sudden appearance, rose to their feet. "He's been taken," she said, her voice ringing with an authority she did not know she possessed. "Malakor has him." Gunnar's face went grim. "How do you know this, Luna?" "I felt it," she said, pressing a hand to her chest where the phantom pain still echoed. "The bond. They are hurting him." She looked at the faces of the warriors gathered around her, seeing their fear, their anger, their loyalty. "He came for me. Now we will go for him." There was a moment of silence, and then Gunnar drew the great axe from his belt and raised it high. "For the Alpha King!" he roared. A chorus of war cries answered him, a sound that shook the very trees. The northern packs were going to war, and she, the lost girl from Greywood, would be leading them. The journey to the Shadowlands was brutal. They moved with a desperate urgency, a river of fur and steel pouring south. Alara rode at the head of the war party with Gunnar, the compass in her soul her unwavering guide. The bond was a constant, painful ache now, a reminder of Kaelin's suffering and the dark magic that held him. They did not stop to rest. They lived on dried meat and sheer determination. Alara felt a strength she had never known, a stamina born of rage and love. The pampered lords of the South thought the Northerners were savages, They were about to find out how savage they could be when their king was threatened. As they crossed the border into the blighted territories controlled by Malachor, the very air grew cold and thin. The trees were twisted, skeletal things, and the ground was barren rock. A sense of wrongness pervaded everything. Finally, she saw it. The fortress from her vision. A spike of black rock piercing a stormy sky, wreathed in shadows. The citadel of Umbra. The army of the north halted at the base of the mountain, a silent, formidable force. The fortress seemed impenetrable, but Alara could feel Kalin inside. His life force, though dampened, was a beacon in that oppressive darkness. "How do we get in?" Gunnar asked, his voice a low rumble. "The gates are sealed by shadow magic." Alara looked up at the dark walls. Fear tried to whisper in her ear, telling her this was impossible, that she was a fool to have come. She silenced it. She was no longer a victim of fear. She was its master. "He came for me," she said, more to herself than to Gunnar. "He walked through a blizzard and pulled me from the snow. He faced down my father's guards. He is in there hurting because of me." Her hand went to the silver mark on her neck. It was humming with a faint warmth, a reservoir of the power that had ignited the bond. "I will not let him suffer alone." She dismounted, her gaze fixed on the shadowy gate. She began to walk forward, alone. "Luna, no!" Gunnar cried, reaching for her. "Stay here," she commanded, her voice echoing with a power that made him freeze. "Wait for my signal." She walked to the great gate, a wall of solid iron infused with pulsing, dark energy. It felt cold and greasy to the touch, and it drank the light around it. She placed both her hands flat against it. She closed her eyes and reached inside herself, not for the compass that led to Kalin, but for the other thing he had given her, that spark, the lightning strike of the bond, the searing heat that was not a burn, but a cleansing fire. She remembered what he had called her. Luna, queen, mate. She was the other half of his soul. If he was the strength of the mountains and the fury of the storm, what was she? She was the light that held back the darkness. She focused all her will, all her love, all her rage into her palms. A faint golden light began to glow beneath her skin. It grew brighter, hotter. The dark magic of the gate recoiled, hissing like water on a hot stone. "Let me in," she whispered, her voice a low, dangerous command. The light exploded from her hands. It was not a gentle glow, but a concussive blast of pure white gold energy. It struck the gate with the force of a battering ram. The shadow magic shrieked and evaporated. The iron groaned, bent, and then burst inwards with a deafening screech of tortured metal. The way was open. That was the signal. Behind her, a roar went up from 1,000 throats, and the northern army charged. Alara did not wait for them. She ran into the fortress, the light still clinging to her hands. The corridors were dark and cold, filled with Malachor's twisted guards, men and women whose souls had been warped by shadow. They came at her, their weapons dark and hungry. She did not have a weapon. She did not need one. She raised her hands, and waves of light poured from her, striking the shadow guards. They screamed as the pure energy touched them, not burning their flesh, but scouring the darkness from their souls, leaving them stunned and disoriented. She followed the pull of the bond, deeper and deeper into the citadel, a golden comet in the oppressive dark. She fought her way to the dungeons, the air thick with the stench of despair and the coppery tang of silver. She found him in the deepest cell. Kalen was chained to the wall, his massive frame slumped in defeat. His wrists and ankles were bound in thick, gleaming shackles of pure silver that sizzled against his skin, sending plumes of acrid smoke into the air. His long, black hair was matted with sweat and blood. His head was bowed, his strength sapped by the poison of the silver. But he was alive. "Kalen!" she cried, her voice breaking. His head lifted slowly. His golden eyes, so vibrant and full of life, were dull, clouded with pain. But when they focused on her, a flicker of the old fire returned. "Alara," he rasped, his voice raw. "You should not have come. It's a trap." A slow, mocking clap echoed from the shadows of the cell. A figure emerged, tall and slender, draped in robes the color of a starless midnight. His face was pale and aristocratic, but his eyes were pits of utter blackness, and a cruel smile played on his thin lips. "Such a touching reunion," Malachor said, his voice smooth as oiled silk and cold as the grave. "The mighty Alpha King brought to his knees, and his little stray come to the slaughter." He looked at Alara, his black eyes lingering on the mark on her neck. "So, this is the great lost Luna. I must admit I am disappointed. I expected more than a frightened little mouse. Valerius sold you to me for a pittance, you know, an alliance and 3 aging horses. He was glad to be rid of you. The old words, the old pain. 3 horses, worthless." For a moment, the frightened girl from Greywood resurfaced, and she felt a tremor of fear. Then she looked at Kalen, chained and bleeding for her, and the fear was burned away by a tidal wave of pure, incandescent rage. "I am not a mouse," she said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl that mirrored the one she had heard from Kalen in the cave. The golden light around her hands intensified, blazing with fury. "And you will not touch him again." Malachor laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "Brave words, but you are nothing. You are a child playing with a candle, and I am the coming night." He raised a hand, and tendrils of shadow coalesced around it, forming a blade of pure darkness. "I was going to use you to break him, but killing you in front of him will be so much more satisfying." He lunged, faster than any human. Alara did not flinch. She did not retreat. She met his charge head-on. She thrust her hands forward, not in a wave, but in a focused, concentrated spear of pure light. Light and shadow collided. The impact threw her back, but she held her ground, gritting her teeth. Malachor's shadow blade sizzled and dissolved where it met her power. He stared, his arrogant smile faltering for the first time. "Impossible," he hissed. "No one wields the ether fire anymore." "My name is Alara," she shouted, pushing more power into the blast. "I am the Luna of the Northern Pax. I am the mate of the Alpha King, and you are trespassing in my world." She took a step forward, and then another, her light pushing back his darkness. He was stronger, more experienced, but his power was born of hate and ambition. Hers was born of love and righteous fury. She could feel Kalen's awe, his pride, his love, pouring through the bond, strengthening her. He was fighting the silver's poison, trying to rise. "Kalen!" she screamed. "Now!" With a roar that shook the very foundations of the fortress, Kalen tore at his chains. The silver glowed red-hot, searing his flesh, but his alpha strength, bolstered by her power flooding through the bond, was absolute. Metal shrieked, groaned, and then snapped. He was free. Malicor's head whipped around in shock at the sound. That split-second distraction was all Alara needed. She unleashed everything she had. The world went white. A nova of golden light erupted from her, a sun being born in the heart of the dungeon. It vaporized the shadows, shattered the remaining chains, and slammed into Malicor. He screamed, a high, thin sound of pure agony as the light, the ether fire, consumed him, unmaking the darkness he was made of. When the light faded, Alara stood panting in the center of the cell, her energy spent. Where Malicor had been, there was only a pile of black dust and the lingering scent of ozone. Silence. Then, strong arms wrapped around her from behind, pulling her back against a solid, warm chest. Kaelin. He buried his face in her hair, his body trembling with exhaustion and relief. "You came for me," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "You came for me first," she whispered, leaning back into him, feeling his strength, his life, his love surrounding her. The battle was over. The Northern Army had routed Malicor's disorganized forces. The citadel of Umbra, its master gone, began to crumble, its dark magic failing. Kaelin, his wounds already beginning to heal, carried Alara from the ruins. He did not put her down until they were back in the northern camp, surrounded by their cheering people. He stood before his warriors, holding her in his arms, her head resting on his shoulder. "Behold!" he roared, his voice booming across the valley. "Your Luna, your queen, she who wields the sun and commands the light, she who walked into darkness and brought her king home." 1,000 warriors knelt as one, their weapons and voices raised in salute. "Luna! Luna! Luna!" Alara looked out at the sea of loyal faces, then up at Kaelin. His golden eyes were blazing with love and pride. He leaned down and kissed her, a deep, possessive kiss that sealed their bond in front of all their people. It was a kiss that tasted of victory, of homecoming, and of a love that had defied kings and shadows. Later, in the quiet of the Alpha's tent, he gently tended to her scrapes and bruises. She did the same for the terrible burns the silver had left on his wrists. His skin was already knitting itself back together, but the scars would remain. "They said you traded 3 territories to get her back," Gunnar's voice would later say, becoming part of the legend told around campfires for generations. He had heard of Kaelin's initial, desperate offer to Malicor before the assault, a bluff to gauge his defenses, an offer of 3 vast, resource-rich territories in exchange for Alara. Kaelin would laugh, the sound a low rumble in his chest. He would pull Alara closer, his hand resting on the silver mark on her neck. "Her father traded her for 3 horses," he would say, his voice soft but heard by all. "I would have traded my entire kingdom. I would have traded my own soul. 3 territories was a bargain." Alara rested her head against his heart, listening to its steady, powerful beat. She was no longer the ghost of Greywood. She was not a servant, not an afterthought, not a girl worth 3 horses. She was Alara, the sun-bearer, the shadow-breaker. She was the mate of the Alpha King. She was a queen. She was home.